He sat awake long after midnight, staring into a dimly lit room that had once been nothing more than another space inside another mansion. It was quiet, painfully quiet, the kind of silence that forces a man to sit with his thoughts, with every decision he has ever made, and every decision he had yet to make. His entire life, he had been surrounded by wealth, staggering wealth, the kind of wealth most people could not comprehend, the kind of money that lived in numbers so large it almost became abstract. But on this night, something felt different. Something shifted inside him. He could not sleep. His mind refused to rest, because somewhere within him, the weight of purpose, or perhaps the absence of it, finally demanded to be acknowledged. He looked at his bank accounts, endless streams of digits, like a river that never dried, never slowed, never risked running out. Money flowed through his world so easily that spending millions meant as little to him as someone else ordering lunch. He had built companies. He had funded ventures. He had donated to organizations with grand missions and polished speeches. But despite it all, something profound, something human, was missing. He could feel it, like a hollow space beneath his ribs. For years he had been applauded, admired, criticized, doubted, praised, envied. None of it had ever mattered as much as it did now. Now that he was thinking not about legacy, not about business, but about human beings. Real human beings. He wondered how many lives could be changed instantly. Not through foundations or bureaucratic systems. Not through grants that required forms and signatures and approvals, but directly. A doorbell, a knock, a conversation. A moment where one person meets another person, not as billionaire and stranger, but as two humans, one able to give, one desperately needing relief. The simplicity of it felt revolutionary. The idea began as a whisper in his mind, small at first, almost unreasonable. Who hands out money at doors? Who sends assistants across cities to knock and offer financial relief without contracts, without repayment, without conditions? Who risks being misunderstood? Who chooses direct generosity over polished philanthropy? A man who understands that life, the real human experience, is painfully short. He stood, finally, and with a steady but urgent breath, he recorded a message. Not a scripted announcement. Not a press release crafted by professionals. He spoke from the rawest part of himself, the part that remembered struggle, the part that remembered what it meant when bills couldn't be paid, when worry consumed sleep, when debt stole breath. He spoke to the world, and his voice carried a simple promise. Tomorrow, he said, a knock may echo at your door, not to take, but to give. Not to convince, but to support. Not empty charity, but real, tangible help that lifts weight off a weary back. He wanted to speak not like a billionaire addressing the public, but like a human being reaching out to other human beings. He imagined older adults sitting at kitchen tables, medicine bottles half empty, because the full prescription cost too much. He imagined parents staring at overdue rent notices, calculating impossible numbers. He imagined young people whose cars had broken down, unable to reach work, losing income until the spiral became inescapable. He imagined medical debt, utility shutoffs, eviction threats, the quiet panic that floods a person's chest when they realize survival has become uncertain. These were the people he wanted to reach, not through charity organizations, not through committees, but door by door, person by person. He made a decision most people would call madness. He instructed his assistants, not actors, not holograms, but real human beings chosen carefully, to prepare identification, prepare funds, and prepare themselves to walk into communities, down streets, to knock on doors and look people in the eye. They were not salespeople. They were not recruiters. They were messengers carrying relief. He imagined that first knock, the sound of uncertainty, disbelief, hope. Imagine a door creaking open slightly, a hesitant face peering through, cautious and confused. And then imagine the moment they hear the words. We're here to help. We're here because you asked. We're here to give you what you need, not as a loan, not as a trade, not as leverage, but as help. No repayment, no contracts, no hidden conditions. Just help, direct, immediate, human. But he also knew the world would question him. People always question what they don't understand. They would wonder why. Why choose strangers over institutions? Why give freely when wealth could be preserved, reinvested, protected? The answers were not complicated. Because money meant nothing if it never touched another soul. Because wealth and used for good was just numbers on a screen, silent, empty, meaningless. Because we do not live forever, and legacy is not built on what we keep, but on what we give. He did not claim he could save the world. He did not pretend he could heal every wound or erase every systemic failure. He was not setting out to cure global inequality or rewrite economic structures. He was simply choosing to help real people with real problems that money could solve today. If someone could breathe again because debt stopped suffocating them, that mattered. If a mother could keep the lights on and feed her children, that mattered. If an elderly man could afford medication and live without pain, that mattered. If a person could keep their job because a broken car was repaired, that mattered. These weren't abstract issues. These were lives. He knew people would try to take advantage. He expected it. He understood that for every person with a genuine need, there might be someone with a fabricated story. But he believed something radical, that helping even those who might not deserve it was worth the risk, if it meant genuine suffering souls were healed in the process. A few dishonest hands were a small price to pay when countless honest ones trembled under struggle. His message to the world was not an advertisement. It was a challenge, a call to humanity, a reminder that wealth, when hoarded, becomes cold, but wealth, when shared, becomes warmth in the lives of others. He warned viewers clearly. Only those who needed help should ask. Greed had no place here. This was not a game, not a competition for sympathy, not an opportunity for opportunists. This was for those whose backs bent beneath financial weight, whose hands shook opening bills, whose nights stretched long with worry instead of rest. He encouraged honesty, simplicity, not dramatic embellishment, just truth. I need $800 for rent. I need $500 for medication. I need $1,200 to fix my car. I need $3,000 for treatment. That was enough. The truth was enough. He decided that tomorrow would be a day of action, not discussion, not planning. Action. Assistance would travel. Doors would open. Money would be placed into shaking hands. Tears might fall. Lives might change. And for the first time, suffering would not be measured or ranked. Need was need, and that alone qualified a soul for relief. He had more money than he could ever spend, more wealth than his children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren could exhaust across generations. But what did that mean, truly? What was the purpose of hoarding lifeboats while people drowned? Tomorrow, everything would begin. The world had heard his promise. Now the world would watch, and more importantly, people who silently suffered might finally breathe. This was only the beginning. Morning did not arrive quietly. It arrived with purpose, with weight, with the electric hum of something extraordinary unfolding across an ordinary world. While most of the city still slept beneath soft dawn light, while streetlights blinked against the fading night, his assistants prepared. They were not dressed like security. They were not armored in black or burdened with protocol. They wore simple clothing, respectful, human, unthreatening, because this mission required softness, not power. Their pockets held envelopes, not contracts. Their hands held identification badges, not permission forms. Their job was not to persuade, but to deliver hope, in paper form, in check form, in cash form, in life-changing form. Cars lined up outside his estate, engines low, headlights cutting through the early haze. They were ordinary vehicles, not luxury fleets. He didn't want spectacle. He wanted sincerity. He wanted the knock on a door to feel like an act of humanity, not a publicity stunt. No cameras, no media entourage, just people helping people, quietly, directly, like neighbors who understand the weight others carry. He stood at his window as the cars rolled forward one by one, like ships leaving harbor, carrying currency instead of cargo, compassion instead of merchandise. The world below his wealth was waking, unaware, unprepared, uncertain of the waves that were about to crash into their lives. He imagined the ripple effect. A single envelope delivered to a desperate household could restore dignity, restore peace, restore breath. He imagined a child sitting at a kitchen table, watching their parents weep, not from fear this time, but from relief. He didn't want applause. He didn't want statues or headlines. He wanted stories, real stories, to stop ending in hopelessness. And so the movement began, not with fireworks or fanfare, but with ignition keys turning, with shoes stepping on his sidewalks, with knuckles preparing to knock on doors that carried decades of stress behind them. But before those knocks ever happened, before his assistants dispersed across towns and neighborhoods, the world responded to his message in a flood he had anticipated, but not fully grasped in magnitude. Comments poured in like rainfall during monsoon. Thousands, then tens of thousands. Stories layered on stories. Strangers typing out their realities, trembling, hesitant, raw. One woman wrote that her husband had cancer, bills piling like mountains, treatment dependent on funds she didn't possess. She wrote that $3,000 could buy time, could buy a breath, could buy another month of hope. Another said their rent was 3 weeks late and eviction hovered like a storm cloud. $800 could keep their children under the same roof for one more month. Another said $1,200 for car repairs meant the difference between employment and unemployment, between security and collapse. One simple request read, $500 for medication. I am tired of choosing between pain and food. Each comment was a heartbeat. Each number was a cry for survival. He read until his eyes burned and his chest felt tight, not with pity, but with recognition of reality. These were not stories crafted for sympathy. These were lives. Entire universes contained in brief sentences. Years of struggle compressed into one line. He remembered when he too had stood at the edge of financial ruin. Before success, before empires, when every dollar mattered. Money, he knew, was oxygen. When you have it, you don't notice. When you lack it, you suffocate. That memory guided him more than wealth ever could. His team began sorting through the requests, not to judge worthiness, not to rank tragedy, but to verify sincerity. They looked for truth, not performance. A genuine struggle has a tone, a weight, a simplicity that cannot be manufactured. They checked identities. They verified addresses. They cross-checked names and details. They were not investigators, only guardians, ensuring real suffering was met with real relief. And when names were confirmed, addresses listed, envelopes filled, the plan moved from idea to action. One assistant drove toward an old neighborhood where paint peeled off houses like bark from dying trees. Children played with worn bicycles, adults washed with quiet exhaustion, and dogs slept beside broken fences. Life existed here, but not without weight. Here, a knock could mean bills, notices, collections, demands. No one expected the opposite. No one expected deliverance. He pictured the first door. A woman in her late 50s perhaps, tired but dignified, checking the peephole with concern. The assistant would hold up identification, voice gentle like morning wind. I'm here because you commented. I'm here because you asked for help. We brought the amount you requested. Imagine that moment. The silence before belief breaks into understanding. Imagine hands trembling as paper touches palm, as a check reflects light across a face lined with years of stress. Imagine a human being witnessing relief in real time. In another neighborhood, an assistant would knock on an apartment door where eviction notices lay tucked under rugs to keep children from seeing them. The father would open the door, confusion turning into hope as he realized someone listened. Someone read his request. Someone came. $800 in hand. Rent rescued. Home preserved. In yet another town, a young mechanic unable to fix his own car, the irony painful, would answer the knock and receive $1,200 that would reopen the door to work, to income, to self-worth. The billionaire knew he could not save everyone, but saving someone was enough. Saving thousands was possible. Saving who he reached mattered. He didn't need perfection. He needed action. He also knew scammers would try, because desperation can twist some into deceit. But even then, he wasn't afraid. He would rather risk losing money to dishonesty than leave an honest person drowning, because he feared deception. Compassion that demands caution before action isn't compassion, it's calculation. And calculation had never healed a soul. He told his team repeatedly, "We don't need perfect certainty. We need humanity. If we err, let us err in favor of kindness." Because one wrong giveaway was survivable, but one missed cry for help could end a life. Meanwhile, skeptics filled comment sections with doubt. This is fake. Nobody gives money like this. There must be a catch. But doubt was natural. The world had conditioned people to fear gifts, to suspect kindness, to distrust generosity. Too many scams had rotted hope. Too many promises had broken trust. He did not blame them. He understood why disbelief existed, but disbelief would not stop the knock. He didn't ask for bank details. He didn't demand personal documents beyond identity verification. He didn't request signatures, collateral, repayment plans. He wanted to restore belief in simple human goodness. Help should not feel like a trap. Help should not require paperwork more suffocating than the problem. Help should feel like breathing after being underwater too long. As morning expanded across the landscape, his assistants dispersed like light cutting through fog, each carrying an envelope capable of rewriting a chapter of someone's life. Not permanently, perhaps, but significantly enough to grant space for healing. Yet this initiative was more than charity. It was a statement, a living question thrown into the world. Why is this rare? Why isn't helping normal? Why is generosity shocking instead of expected? He wasn't attacking other wealthy people, but he was challenging them. Without speaking their names, he confronted them with comparison. If one man could do this, why not more? If billions sat still while humans suffered, then wealth was wasted potential. His own wealth was staggering, beyond need, beyond consumption. If he spent recklessly for the remainder of his life, he could not reduce it meaningfully. Wealth had long passed necessity and entered excess. Excess, he realized, was not privilege, it was obligation. He spoke often with his closest advisor that morning, reflecting on what led him here, and the answer came from the softest place: family. The night before, he had held his newborn grandson for the first time. Tiny, fragile, alive in a world heavy with inequality. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb with effortless trust. That moment cracked him open. Wealth had never made him cry, but innocence did. A child unaware of economics, unaware of pain, unaware of struggle, pure existence, untouched by financial fear. He wanted that child to grow up in a world where help was instinct, not exception, where abundance flowed outward instead of stagnating at the top, where humans didn't drown while lifeboats remained anchored and used. He could not fix the world entirely, but he could model the world he wished existed. If he helped 1,000 people, then 1,000 ripples began. If another wealthy person followed his example, another ripple began. And if others joined, waves would form, waves strong enough to shift culture. But even if no one followed, even if the effort remained a solitary flame in darkness, he would continue, because light is never wasted. Back in his study, while assistants navigated highways and neighborhoods, he reflected on stories people had shared. One message haunted him, not for its tragedy, but for its simplicity. A mother of 3 wrote, "I don't need much. If possible, for $100. I missed 2 shifts because my child was sick. I just need to catch up on groceries. We're tired of rice and salt. Not luxury, not indulgence, just food." He imagined her children eating meals that didn't feel like survival rations. He imagined laughter returning to a home where scarcity had made everything quiet. How many homes carried quiet like that? How many children learned to measure bites because scarcity became normal? How many parents skipped meals so daughters could eat? Wealth could break those silences. Wealth could feed families. Wealth, when shared, became dignity. He whispered to himself, "Money only has meaning when it moves." People often misunderstood wealth. They worshipped it, chased it, envied it. But money had no soul unless given purpose. Hoarded wealth was like water trapped in a glass while others died of thirst. Wealth must flow to nourish. It must move to matter. He was not giving handouts. He was giving oxygen. The first assistant arrived at the first door before noon. He stood at the step, inhaling deeply. This was more than delivery. This was human history on a micro scale. A moment where despair could end. A moment where belief might be restored. He knocked. A pause. Footsteps approached cautiously from the other side. A lock clicked. The door opened, just a crack, enough for eyes to appear, guarded. The assistant spoke gently. Not rehearsed. Not mechanical. Personal. "I'm here because you asked for help." The door opened wider. Disbelief flooded the woman's face like sunrise across shadow. She expected demands, not relief. Yet relief was placed in her palms, weightless paper heavy with impact. Tears didn't fall immediately. Sometimes shock takes time to thaw. She whispered one word. "Why?" And the assistant answered exactly as instructed. "Because you needed help. Because someone can help. Because this time, the world said yes instead of ignore." In that second, generosity became real, not spoken, but felt. Not promised, but delivered. That was only door one. There were thousands more waiting. And tomorrow, the knock might be yours. Morning faded slowly into afternoon, and word of what was happening had begun to spread, not through television, not through news channels, but through people. Real people. Neighbors whispering across fences. Shopkeepers telling customers. Students calling their parents. Mothers texting their sisters. The kind of communication that moves like a pulse through a city, warm and alive. People didn't know all the details. They didn't know how long this would last, how many homes would be visited, or whether tomorrow would bring the same miracle. But they knew one thing with certainty. Someone was helping. Someone was giving. Someone was listening. And hope, when it arrives unannounced, spreads faster than any rumor. Through quiet streets where cars rusted and houses leaned with age, where sidewalks cracked and dreams cracked with them. Through those very streets, his team continued. Door after door, story after story. Each home held a universe inside it, full of invisible battles, silent struggles, private heartbreaks no one else could see. They reached a house where the paint had long peeled away, where the wood beneath had surrendered to years of weather. An old woman answered, her voice frail, her breathing slow. She stood with one hand gripping the doorframe to steady herself, and in her eyes lived decades of lost youth, lost friends, lost time. When she was told why they had come, she didn't smile immediately. She didn't cheer. She simply blinked, long and slow, letting the words enter her like sunlight seeping into a cold room. Her need was simple medication. Pills that kept her heart steady, her blood flowing, her life continuing one more day, one more week, one more month. She never thought anyone would ask about her survival. She had grown used to pushing through pain quietly, invisibly, as older people often do. But today, she didn't have to be invisible. They handed her an envelope, enough to pay for medicine for months, enough to breathe. And when she closed her door again, she didn't cry loudly. She sat down alone in her living room, trembling silently, holding the envelope against her chest like something sacred. Her tears fell not from sadness, but from shock. Shock that someone still cared. Shock that the world had not forgotten her. Across town, the team reached an apartment where the hallway lights flickered weakly, the kind of place where struggle hangs in the air like humidity. A father answered this time, a man with tired eyes, with hands that looked like they had carried heavy labor for many years. He didn't want help at first. Pride stood in his throat like a stone, refusing to move. But pride is a thin shield against hunger, against unpaid bills, against the fear of failing the people you love. They asked what he needed most, and he finally whispered it. A chance. Not thousands of dollars. Not a miracle. Just enough to buy tools, so he could return to work. Enough to fix his situation himself. They gave him more than tools. They gave him dignity. They gave him the ability to stand again without begging. He didn't weep in front of them. But when the door closed, his knees softened. His shoulders fell. The weight he had carried for years loosened its grip. He held the envelope like fresh air in paper form, like a second life. Not every home was tragic. Some were simply tired. A young couple answered a small suburban door, newly married, still hopeful, but living paycheck to paycheck, where one broken appliance could destroy a budget, where car trouble could end employment. They didn't ask for thousands. They asked for breathing room, and breathing room was given. One woman requested help not for herself, but for someone she loved. A neighbor with cancer, a friend with debt, a mother with no roof. The billionaire had not expected it, but generosity often inspires more generosity. Those who know pain do not wish it upon others. The assistants kept knocking. Some doors took minutes, others took hours, and slowly, beautifully, an idea that had once lived only in a billionaire's mind unfolded into real life, into hugs, into relief, into gratitude spoken in shaky voices. But with every heart touched, with every problem eased, something unexpected began to happen inside him. The billionaire, the man at the center of all this, began to change. At first, he had thought he was giving money. Then he realized he was giving something far rarer, peace. For years, peace had been something he himself lacked, even with billions in accounts. But now, seeing strangers smile with tears in their eyes, hearing voices crack with reborn hope, he felt it. Peace. Not shallow peace born from control, but deep peace born from connection. He sat in his office again, this time not in silence, but listening to messages. Thousands of them. Some heartbreaking, some inspiring, some so painful they tightened the chest. They came from mothers, students, widows, workers, dreamers, all reaching out not with greed, but with need. He realized then that no matter how much he gave, there would always be more pain in the world. More hunger, more bills, more broken systems, more lives balancing between survival and collapse. But he also understood something else, something powerful. Even if he couldn't fix everything, he could fix something. Even if he couldn't help everyone, he could help someone. And helping even one person mattered. He began preparing the next phase. Not bigger, not louder, deeper, more personal, more direct. He wanted to speak to the world again, but this time not as a man with wealth, as a man with purpose. He would continue sending help door to door. He would continue choosing humans over institutions. He would continue until his wealth no longer gathered dust, but gathered change. And somewhere in the city tonight, someone was sleeping easier because of him. Somewhere a mother smiled while cooking dinner. Somewhere an elderly man swallowed medicine without fear of running out. Somewhere a father polished new tools with steady hands. Somewhere a young woman breathed for the first time without anxiety crushing her lungs. Lives were shifting. Hope was returning. Humanity was not dead. It had simply been waiting for someone to knock. This was only day one. Night fell slowly again, but this night felt different from the last. Yesterday, silence was heavy because purpose was missing. Tonight, silence was peaceful because purpose had begun. The billionaire sat again in his room, but not restless like before. His thoughts were calmer, yet heavier, more aware. He had seen too much, felt too much, heard too many stories to ever return to the world he knew before. He did not celebrate. He did not feel victorious. Because he had seen something raw and unforgettable. Pain hidden behind polite smiles. Hunger disguised beneath normal conversations. People pretending to be okay simply because breaking down had no place in their schedule. The world looked normal on the surface, but under it, millions of silent battles raged like storms with no sound. He realized something tragic, yet undeniable. People don't cry because they are weak. People cry because they have been strong for too long. He had met strength yesterday, in old eyes, in young voices, in tired hands. He had seen the kind of resilience no motivational speech could replicate. He had seen people fighting life every single day and still waking up again. And he felt something like respect, deep, reverent respect for those who have nothing yet continue anyway. He stood now at his window, the city beneath him glowing with thousands of lights. Each light represented a life. Each life represented a story. Each story carried struggle and hope and love and heartbreak. And he, with all his wealth, finally understood that money wasn't about power. Money was about relief. Money was about time. Money was about dignity. He didn't want applause. He didn't want headlines. He didn't want to become a hero. Heroes save everyone. He couldn't. Heroes change the world. He could only change pieces of it. But he could give something heroes couldn't always give. He could give rest. He could give breathing room. He could give the kind of help that landed softly, like a hand on a shaking shoulder. Tomorrow, he knew, people would wait at windows, hoping, wondering if a knock would come. The thought moved through his heart like a weight, like responsibility. This wasn't a one-day gesture. This couldn't be a single chapter. This had to continue, until continuation became movement, until movement became change. And so he prepared for the next day, bigger, not in amount, but in reach. He doubled his team, more hands, more feet, more hearts carrying envelopes, listening to stories, knocking on doors where silence lived like dust. The second morning arrived with a new kind of energy, not surprise this time, but anticipation. Across neighborhoods, people were awake early, windows cracked open, ears tuned to footsteps in hallways. But something beautiful happened, something unexpected. It wasn't just people waiting to receive help. Some waited to give. One woman, whose electricity had been saved the previous day, stood outside her home with tea for the assistants. Embarrassed she couldn't repay money, but offering warmth, kindness, gratitude in return. Another man, who had once been a carpenter before illness took his strength, offered to help repair broken doors in anyone's home the team visited. A young boy brought drawings, colorful sketches of hope, of thank you, of smiling faces holding envelopes. Help had started a ripple. Relief had awakened generosity. Goodness had multiplied like a heartbeat moving through the city. At the fifth house of the morning, something unforgettable happened. A child answered the door, no older than 10, eyes wide, hair uncombed, shirt slightly torn at the sleeve. He looked confused at the adults standing outside, holding envelopes. His voice was small when he asked who they were. When his mother appeared behind him, exhausted, embarrassed, apologizing for the mess. They explained why they had come. Her hands covered her mouth, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Not because she didn't believe them, but because she believed too much. Some people dream of miracles quietly, secretly, afraid to speak them aloud in case hope shatters like thin glass. She asked for school supplies. Not for herself, for her son. Not a new phone. Not expensive clothes. Not luxury. Just notebooks, pencils, a uniform that fit. They didn't give her enough for school supplies. They gave her enough for school years. And when she sank to her knees, crying into her hands, the boy didn't understand fully, but he understood one thing. His mother was relieved. His mother could breathe. His mother wasn't alone. Stories like this continued house after house. One man needed a laptop to continue online study. Another needed to clear hospital debt. A young girl needed braces for her teeth. A homeless man needed food and a place to sleep. Every door opened a different chapter of humanity. Joy, pain, fear, hope, dreams, loss. But then came a door that changed even the billionaire. A woman answered slowly, older, gentle, carrying decades of sorrow behind her eyes. When asked what she needed, she almost laughed, not because life was funny, but because she didn't know how to ask for help anymore. Years of disappointment had trained her heart to expect nothing. She said quietly, "Give to someone younger, someone with a future. My time has been lived." And that sentence struck him like lightning. People didn't just suffer financially. People suffered in silence, believing they no longer deserved relief, believing life had passed them, believing they were finished. He instructed the team to give her enough for comfort, bills, food, warmth, medical care, support. They slipped the envelope into her hand gently, respectfully, not as charity, but as honor. And for the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as old, not as forgotten, as human, as worthy. That night, when the team returned and placed used envelopes on his desk, the billionaire felt something no money had ever given him before: fulfillment. Not excitement, not thrill, fulfillment. He hadn't saved the world, but he had touched it, and the world had touched him back. He sat again beneath dim light, but this time, sleep did not frighten him. He closed his eyes knowing tomorrow would continue, because purpose is not something you do once. Purpose becomes life. The next morning did not begin with excitement. It began with responsibility. The billionaire woke not to luxury or comfort, but to purpose. His wealth no longer felt like ownership, it felt like duty. Every coin he held represented a possibility, a heartbeat, a second chance, a life redirected from despair toward hope. His team expanded once more. More volunteers came, not for payment, not for fame, but to feel what they felt on those streets. Goodness, once awakened, attracts more goodness. People who witnessed kindness yesterday wished to participate in kindness today. They didn't ask for recognition, they asked for envelopes and addresses. By day 3, the movement was no longer a gesture, it was a wave. Cars were loaded, routes were drawn, hands carried envelopes with care, as though they had weight beyond paper and currency. Because they did, they carried relief, reassurance, belief in humanity. And again, doors opened. At one small house, a man with trembling hands answered. His voice cracked from lack of sleep. He didn't ask for money for himself, he asked for his wife. She lay inside on a hospital bed, too weak to stand, too young to suffer so much. Medical bills had eaten through their savings, forcing him to sell belongings, memories, even their wedding rings. He spoke softly, ashamed of how life had stripped them. When they asked what he needed, he did not request treatment or comfort or miracles. He whispered, eyes lowered, "I just want her to stop worrying." That sentence broke something in everyone standing there. They stepped inside. The woman, pale but smiling through pain, apologized for her condition, as if suffering required apology. The assistant sat beside her, listening, truly listening, without hurry. And when they handed the envelope, she didn't react instantly. She stared at it quietly, like it was something unreal, like dreams were never supposed to be this tangible. Tears came slowly, then all at once, not dramatic, not loud, just pure release. The kind of crying people do when hope finally returns after long absence. Her husband held her hand. They said nothing for a long time, because words were too small for what they felt. The team left the house silently, carrying the weight of love they had witnessed, the kind that persists even through illness and poverty, the kind that money alone cannot create but can help protect. Not every house held sorrow. Some held ambition. At one building, a teenager answered, confident, curious, eyes sharp with intelligence. He dreamed of becoming an engineer, but had almost dropped out due to fees. He had talent, but no opportunity. When asked what he needed most, he didn't request gadgets or phones or clothes. He said one word: education. They gave him a future. They paid his semester. Then the next. Then the next. Not just enough to survive, enough to grow, enough to rise, enough to prove that poverty should not define potential. Because brilliance is wasted when opportunity is locked behind price. Word spread further, not as rumor, as belief. People didn't just talk about envelopes. They talked about humanity, about kindness returning like rain to dry soil. Neighbors who ignored each other for years now stood together in driveways, sharing stories, sharing warmth. Struggle had once isolated them. Now relief connected them. One woman started cooking meals for elders on her street. One young man began repairing broken roofs for free. A store owner reduced prices for families in need. A mechanic offered labor without charge for the struggling. A movement had begun that money alone could never have created. Because money didn't change people, compassion did. The billionaire watched news reports quietly. He never stepped into the spotlight. He refused interviews. He declined praise. He only watched the world react to what generosity looked like when stripped of ego. He knew now, the greatest power wealth offers is not control, but the ability to remove suffering quickly. In the evening, he drove to the city himself. No cameras, no security, no announcement. Just a man in a car, searching for lives not yet reached. He walked among streets he had never been close to before, places where survival was louder than dreams. And yet among those streets, he found beauty, raw, unfiltered beauty. Children playing with broken toys, but laughing without restraint. Men sitting outside small shops sharing stories instead of despair. Women exchanging meals with neighbors even when they had little. He realized something profound. People living with the least often give the most. Because when you know the taste of hunger, you do not wish it to others. When you know the weight of debt, you lift others with both hands. When you know pain deeply, empathy becomes instinct. He sat on the curb among them, talking not as billionaire to poor, but human to human. People shared lives with him, not begging, not pleading, simply opening their stories like windows after long winter. And listening changed him more than giving. He returned that night to his home, but home no longer felt like marble and walls. Home began to feel like the streets he walked, the voices he heard, the hands he shook. He slept not with wealth beside him, but with humanity inside him. The next morning would come, and with it, more doors, more envelopes, more lives shifting quietly under the weight of kindness. Because giving was no longer charity. Giving had become identity. Giving had become meaning. Giving had become who he was. So here is what he asks now, not for himself, but for the world. If you need help, speak. If you can help, act. If you believe in humanity, share it. And if you want to witness what happens next, not in theory, but in reality, subscribe. Because this is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of a movement. A movement built on generosity, not greed. On connection, not distance. On humans remembering how to be human again. Next week, new doors will open. New hands will receive envelopes. New lives will shift from drowning to breathing. And you, yes, you, can be part of it. Follow this journey. Share it. Stand with it. And if you ever receive a knock on your door, open it with hope. Because kindness is returning. Because compassion is contagious. Because the world changes one door at a time. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Not for numbers, but for impact. Let this message reach the one person who needs it most. A door will knock soon. A life will change. And maybe that life will be yours.